Greetings, Stuart.
Hey, Jill.
So you were in East Palestine.
I was.
Have something to report, and I'm really looking forward to hearing this.
Yeah, so the EPA had it was a city council meeting in East Palestine, Ohio. The first half of the city council meeting was dedicated to the EPA's update on everything that they've accomplished and done so far with the train derailment, the Norfolk Southern train derailment, and sort of what their future looks like in the city.
As far as exposures, contamination, or there's the science part of it?
Cleanup, mitigation. They had a number of folks there that had different specialties.
Just to introduce some of those members, first, Eric Pohl. He's our lead on-scene coordinator. Steve Hall is one of our operations on-scene coordinators. Michelle Kerr has been what we call our environmental unit leader, basically our chief scientist. Pat Cameron, wave your hand back there. Pat's one of our contractors. Judy Canova is a hydrogeologist, is helping us out with a lot of the groundwater and environmental work that's going on.
They had some really fancy maps and things to show all of the sampling that has taken place and where it's come from. And they were basically just giving the community kind of an update on where things stand.
And where do they stand?
To date, they've removed over 176,000 tons of solid waste from the immediate area of the train derailment.
That gave me chills.
It's a lot. The map is pretty intense. They've done over 3,000 samples of water and air.
What about soil? Did they mention that?
And soil, yeah. Mostly the focus seems to have been on water and air. At least that's what was mostly talked about there. But they have done a lot. They've pulled a lot of dirt and soil out of the area. They've sampled, they've done indoor air testing on over 600 homes and businesses. And basically where it stands now is they're saying that they're not really seeing in their sampling anything that is really a major health concern. Now, I have some questions about all of that, and I'll get into that here in a second.
Health concerns, environmental concerns, one and the same, or did they differentiate?
Well, they really do seem to be more focused on human health in the area. They didn't talk that much about the environment or like ecological health or anything, which is kind of what you would expect from the EPA to talk about. But I think their primary focus, probably rightfully so, is that the people living in East Palestine are safe. And they're saying that they are, essentially.
How did the community respond to that? Do they believe they're safe? I mean, is it split? It
was really interesting because the vibe that I got was that about half the people there were there to hear about other city council business. And there seemed to be this contingent of the population that was kind of tired of hearing about the train derailment. Then the other half of the room was still very much interested in the train derailment and had real concerns. There was this sort of palpable frustration and distrust amongst many of the community members. There was even a little bit of a intense moment between one community member and the mayor. A lot of accusations were thrown around. And the meeting devolved at one point to being fairly unproductive as far as city council meetings go, because there was just so much conflict between these people. So you can see that, it's obviously still very much a heated topic of discussion in East Palestine. Not everybody's on the same page. Not everybody agrees. And there is I would say, a fair amount of distrust that certain people feel towards what the EPA is telling them. And just the handling of like this city and how those different aspects of it have been handled.
Would this not be a question for the hydrogeologist to answer?
Yeah, I can put to her as well.
I would love to hear her response.
I would like to hear that too, and we talk practically every day.
That seems to be her forte. I was actually told by Mr. Durno that if I had any questions to find a hydrogeologist.
Because
so there she is. That's who I've been waiting to hear from. That's who can answer their groundwater, because I was originally told by the EPA, the Ohio EPA, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when.
Okay, and next steps, what's happening? Is this kind of like, oh, well, we're just going to keep reporting back to you, the EPA will keep reporting back, or?
They reiterated that they're there for the long haul, that the EPA is committed to staying there until they feel like it's complete. There are a couple, even though they're basically saying that things are safe for people, there are some little pockets of contamination that they're still finding here and there that they are committed to staying to deal with. And right now in D.C., there's this consent decree that is in motion. So it's, I'm not really familiar with consent decrees and what the process is, but it's in process in D.C. at the moment. If that consent decree passes as the EPA has presented it, then it means that the EPA will get a lot more funding, and they'll basically be in East Palestine for up to 10 years.
That would be nice.
Continuing like soil restoration efforts and working on the creeks and things of that nature.
But when you say creeks, and I was there testing with scientists, and they were bad, really bad. And so if they didn't really address the issue if the creeks are still contaminated, if they are and remediation has not occurred, so then should people be fishing in them and, children playing in them? Or, was that brought up at all?
No, not really. They did talk about the creeks. They talked about the sheen, that oily sort of rainbow-colored sheen, and they said that they are still managing that. So that's still there.
That's still there?
Yeah.
We're encouraged by what we're seeing in the streams, and we're seeing the improvement, right? Steve will talk about it a little bit more, but we're about to kick off on yet another assessment of these streams. Sulphur Run here in town, a little bit of a different story, but also a little bit of the same. So May 2023, November 2023, June 2024. And we're seeing some areas where there was some pretty significant heavy sheening. And again, over time, we're still seeing heavy sheening in places, but it's getting better. And I don't think anybody will say that the creeks are done yet, and that's why we're going to this next sheet reassessment and sampling event that Steve will talk about here in a moment.
Especially if the sediment is stirred up.
Well, yeah, that's what we did. We got a shovel, stirred it up, and then it was just everywhere. So that's still happening.
That's still happening. They're still dealing with that.
But even back then, it was like remediation. Like you'd have to bring it. How could you remove all that sediment soil from the creek beds?
That's where we kind of get into like some of the holes that I think exist, and some of the concerns that I think are still there that aren't being really adequately addressed. I think, to be fair, the individuals that were there representing the EPA, those are individuals that have been there working hard on this issue from the beginning, and I don't want to disparage any of those individuals because they all seem like their heart's in the right place. I don't know any of them. I've heard a couple of them speak at a few different events, so I kind of recognize their face. And but there are some serious holes that I think exist in at least what I can see that they're doing that are not being addressed. And one of them is the mitigation efforts.
So I'm curious, I know you guys did the air knifing, but in between that, if you're just going back and assessing, but you're actually not doing any remediation, that means you're assuming that, or hoping that restoration or remediation effort is really just the natural water collecting the contamination and bringing it downstream to our neighbors. Yeah, and if you're just going back and assessing and waiting for it to not be there without actually any remediation efforts, the underlying assumption is that the stream's carrying it downstream to our neighbors, and, you know, kind of passing the buck.
Yeah. Well, that's that again. It's like I said earlier. It's tricky because it's you know, we believe that the bulk, if not all, of the derailment related contamination in these streams has been remediated. Right? Can we say that with 100% certainty? No. Can we say that there are chemical contaminants in that stream? Sulfur Run. If Bill Zawinski from Ohio EPA is here, he'd tell you he would do a lot better job of explaining this than I will, but humor me for a moment. Sulfur Run is considered a limited use stream. It runs through a commercial industrial area. It runs almost in a channelized form through a residential area. And as a result, it's not very adept to healthy aquatic life. And our roads discharge to it. These industrial properties discharge to it. So it's going to have, there's always going to be issues with Sulfur Run. I was talking to somebody earlier that told me some stories about how badly impacted it was pre-EPA days back in the day. So it does have a history. That's one of the reasons in our consent decree that we asked for the waterways improvement portion, which is essentially the cleanup that you're asking for, to deal with contaminants, and not just deal with the contaminants in the street, but also improve the watershed so that all those things I just mentioned don't have as much of an impact on the street.
Air knifing is one of the big mitigation efforts they've been using, which is just compressed air getting blown into the ground. And the idea is that you aerate these chemicals and then they break down faster. But the problem with air knifing is that it also just spreads chemicals around.
That's what I'm saying. That's what my first thought was. I didn't say it, but I was thinking it.
And it can push the chemicals actually further down into the ground. And so, yeah, it doesn't, like, none of the mitigation efforts seem to be, and this is true not of just East Palestine, but I feel like this is true of a lot of incidents like East Palestine, where there is no real mitigation, technically. Like, you're not going to go in and render all these harmful chemicals inert. You basically have just a couple options. One is to put it on train cars and take it to someone else's backyard and dump it. Or the other is to dilute it, like spread it around and dilute it and try to get it to interact with UV and oxygenation, and then that will naturally break the chemicals down over time. Eventually. But that leads me to the other issue, is that I looked through all their testing. So they've got, they have these spreadsheets on their website that show all the samples that they've taken, when they were taken, where they were taken from. And like, they're testing for all the major compounds like vinyl chloride, because we know vinyl chloride was on a train. But vinyl chloride, when it breaks down, turns into other chemicals.
Right.
And
were they testing for those?
They're not testing for all of those constituent chemicals. There's a lot of those constituent chemicals that are just missing, or like they only tested like once or twice. And some of those chemicals are just as harmful as the main compounds. So I think there's a big blind spot in their testing. And I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak about this with any kind of expertise. And maybe there's a good explanation for that, but I can't, from what I've read, I can't find one. Like, why wouldn't you be testing for phosgene, which vinyl chloride turns into when it's combusted, you know what I mean? And there's a couple others that are just like, you look through the spreadsheet and they tested for it twice out of 3,000 plus samples.
Was it 6,000?
Well, 3,000 plus for the water, 3,000 plus for the air.
I see.
Yeah. And so those are two big blind spots. So in theory, your air knifing could have driven some of these compounds or chemicals deeper into the ground where they won't break down as quickly. And so years from now, somebody could be, planting a tree or something and become exposed to these things. The other issue is that when these chemicals are tested for, they show up as non-detect on the sample. But that just means it's below a certain threshold.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's not there.
Right.
And so the other big hole here is there was no talk at all about compound long-term exposure to these things. And so you could theoretically have a situation where all these chemicals are non-detect, but still present enough that someone who's interacting with it every single day is getting an exposure.
Yes, it's bringing back memories of a lot of issues that we were dealing with at the onset of this, and I wish I had more answers, and I guess I'm going to try to find them or bring in some of those folks that I was working with then and see if they can help us go into this a little deeper. And
yeah, and I guess the big takeaway for me is, these are holes that exist for me that seem obvious, but like I said, maybe there's an explanation, and I would love to talk to somebody who has an explanation for that, or that can tell us that, yeah, this is a problem, that they're not testing for things like this. The other thing is like dioxins and furans. They haven't done a lot of testing for dioxins and furans.
the only reason they did it in the first place is because the scientists that were up there involved and the community started demanding it,
And when East Palestine happened, I started looking into testing for dioxins on our farm. And I talked to a lab, I forget where they're from, like down south somewhere. And they told me on the phone that dioxins are really hard to test for, actually. There's only a few labs in the country that actually do it because there's not a big market for it. Prior to East Palestine, it was really just like super fun industrial sites. And so there's not a lot of labs that have invested in the equipment that they need to test for dioxins. And he said that the other thing is it doesn't make a lot of sense for a landowner like me to test for dioxins because in order to get an accurate understanding of the dioxin load on a piece of land, you have to test like multiple times every year consistently for years because of the way that the dioxins migrate around on a piece of land. So a single test doesn't tell you much, is basically what they told me. So you have to have kind of like a strategic, comprehensive, ongoing plan to test for dioxins and have a meaningful result.
It's not simple, any of it. And just so folks know, you live about 6 miles from where the train derailed and the controlled burn occurred, and that's how we know each other.
Yeah.
Because I came with the scientists to your farm and tested your soil and water several times.
Yeah, so I guess for me the big takeaway is that there is a fair amount of distrust in that community of the EPA. And I think that some of that distrust is justified just based on some of these holes that we're seeing. Not to mention, there was a whistleblower last year that came out and basically accused the EPA of withholding data and manipulating data regarding East Palestine. And that wasn't really very widely covered in the news.
And that was never addressed? Did EPA ever make a statement? Or
No, not at this meeting. And so, I think that this continues to be an issue where you have this department of the government that in theory is supposed to be there to protect the environment and communities against toxic industries. And there's a big question in people's minds on whether that's actually effectively happening or if the anger is just being kind of managed by the EPA. Because one of the things that did come up was, why has Norfolk Southern been able to basically clean up their own crime scene, quote unquote? You know?
Oh, good point.
Because
Great way to put it.
they're the ones that have been responsible for doing all of the mitigation, hiring the contractors to do the testing, and doing all of the cleanup. The EPA is just there to kind of direct them and verify their results. And so there's this big question, like, why has Norfolk Southern been in the driver's seat this whole time?
Since the beginning. I mean, they were the ones who determined where they were going to test for and what kind of tests. I mean, they basically ran the show the whole time, even including making the decision for the controlled burn. And, you know, at one point they were trying to blame the
local fire department.
Give me a break.
Yeah, and there was a lot of anger towards the mayor and
From some people.
And I don't know enough about the situation. You know, I don't live in East Palestine, so I don't know what all that comes from. But I do think just from my own experience living in kind of a smaller rural town, rural community, I mean, I feel bad for all the officials in that town. Like, nobody signs up to be a mayor or a fire chief in a small rural town expecting to have to deal with something on that scale.
No.
Totally. And I think that just speaks to how irresponsible it is to be running these trains through places like that in the first place.
Exactly. All what? To make plastic?
Yeah.
The last thing we need on this planet or in our bodies. We could go on that. I'm just saying, it's like vinyl chloride is used to make, isn't it PVC pipes?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, so it was interesting. You know, the East Palestine situation hasn't been at the forefront of my mind the last year or so. So it was kind of interesting to go and plug back in and just see where things are at the moment. I think that regardless of how you feel about the EPA and their handling of it, I think this consent decree would be a good thing for East Palestine because it commits a more long-term presence there. And more to come on East Palestine.
Yeah, well, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a big issue. We could talk about it for probably
and bring
a while.
Some guests in to help clarify. And all right, thank you.
All right.
Peace.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Exposure. We are a grassroots, self-published show, and your support is invaluable. You can support our work directly at exposurestudios.org or by simply liking, commenting, and sharing these videos. And don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up to date on this constantly evolving topic and catch new shows as they drop. Exposure is hosted and produced by the founder of the Ohio Valley Allies, Jill Hunkler. Our co-host, executive producer, and creative director is Stuart Day. Our associate producer and director of operations is Wea Slater. Our video editor and videographer is Grant Newman. And our theme song was created by Spencer Day. Listen to Exposure on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram for more content. Find out how you can take action at the community level or support our work through donations by visiting our website. This show only exists because of the generosity and the commitment of community members just like you. See